The DS Zelda games are kinda weird. Sequels to Wind Waker aiming to continue the story and general gameplay while translating it to a top-down perspective. And if you've seen my previous Zelda retrospectives, then you probably already know that I'm not the biggest fan of Wind Waker, chalking it up to being just okay. But despite that, I actually really enjoy these games, even more than the Wind Waker. They're easily the most underrated games in the series and most deserving of a modern day remake. And you know what's sad? No one else seems to think that. No one else likes these games, to the point that I am convinced that I am the world's #1 fan of them. Then again, I did slander Phantom Hourglass pretty hard in my Skyward Sword video for some reason, so I guess I'm a hypocrite now. Pretty based, not gonna lie. Despite having some issues with them, I'm gonna try to talk about some of those issues less than the good stuff because they deserve an actual positive video about them, Josh dang it. So please join me in this Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks retrospective. For DS games, I suppose they could look worse. I do think that they have the benefit of using an art style that can be more easily mangled than other Zeldas. The art direction is as strong here as it was in Wind Waker, and I really like the designs of the new characters. The lighting can be pretty weird sometimes, and there are occasional moments of baffling slowdown, like in the Fire Realm in Spirit Tracks for instance. There wasn't that much being rendered on screen, and yet the frame rate nearly halved. The colors also feel a bit washed out, though that could just be a me thing. Otherwise, for DS games adapting the Wind Waker art style, they do an admirable job. The music, on the other hand, is about on par with Wind Waker, in that there are a few really great pieces of music, but otherwise it's mostly just okay. Linebeck's theme is good, the Sands of Time is mysterious and ethereal, Island Life feels like a cool adaptation of Outset Island, even if not as catchy, and that's about the only tracks that I really like from Phantom Hourglass. Spirit Tracks has one of the best overworld tracks in the entire series, tied with Twilight Princess as being my absolute favorite. It really makes me wish for a proper orchestrated version. The Tower of Spirits is easily one of the best pieces of dungeon music in the series, but outside of that, there really isn't that much that really sticks with me. That's not to say that they're bad, just that they aren't really up there in terms of my favorites in the series. Now, if there was one defining feature of these games that is the most divisive, it would for sure be the controls. You're not controlling Link as much as you are guiding him along with the stylus. It's definitely weird for sure, especially when it comes to combat. I will admit that I would absolutely prefer if the games had normal controls. It's not like they wouldn't be able to accomplish this on the DS, but I will also say that the game is built around these strange controls and the jank that surrounds it. For me, bad controls mainly stem from a game not being designed around those controls, or if they actively make the experience more frustrating. I'm not the biggest fan of aiming at the original release of Metroid Prime on GameCube, but I would never say that the controls are bad since it isn't too obtrusive to adapt to, and the game is designed with this method of play in mind. The same sentiment applies to these two games, just on a much larger scale. Every action is performed on the touchscreen, the buttons only being used to activate items. If you just take the time to get used to them, then I feel like your enjoyment of these games would probably be at least 10 times better. That being said, there are definitely some gimmicky elements tacked on here, some of them being relatively fine and others being really annoying. Things like using the microphone to use the whirlwind aren't that bad since it's a relatively simple action, and having to put the DS into sleep mode in order to copy the map on the bottom screen to the map on the top is a neat little puzzle. But blowing torches out or having to use the microphone to get a character's attention make me roll my eyes, as there really isn't a justification for it. But the one that always aggravates me to no end is the Spirit Flute from Spirit Tracks. Throughout your adventure, you find Locomo so that they can teach you a song to open the way to the next dungeon, and actually playing the flute is only slightly less infuriating than the harp from Skyward Sword. Because God forbid you don't properly sustain a note, thus causing you to have to restart the entire song, which is especially irritating in the Oceanside one. You silly old fool, I will let Hyrule fall into darkness so he can be killed by the Demon Lord himself. I do give it props for actually kind of feeling like you're playing an instrument though, I'll give them that one. If it worked better, then it would actually be kind of immersive. The best gimmick on display in these games is how maps are handled. Outside of the dungeons, that is, but we'll get into that can of worms later. Once you enter an area, you will have a completed map of that area, which then allows you to draw whatever you like, be it solutions to puzzles, notes like where out of reach treasure is, or whatever else might help you remember something important. The puzzles on display using the maps are all quite memorable and fun, forcing you to explore the area and take in your surroundings. I think that the head statues in Spirit Tracks are especially good in this regard, though I'll get to them in the next section. The map system feels like the one thing that truly uses the DS hardware well, and it's what would make any potential remaster of these games incredibly hard because of how integrated it is. One of my favorite aspects of The Wind Waker is the story. As of this video's creation, it is my favorite story in the series. It's got this beautiful theme of letting go of the past and embracing the next generation, with Ganondorf and the King of Hyrule both using Zelda and Link as pawns to bring a new golden age on their people, with the king having this cool arc of growing past that, and instead of wishing for prosperity to Hyrule Kingdom or whatever, he instead wishes that the next generation may secure their future. Ganondorf is at his best in terms of writing, sympathetic while still being intimidating. His motivations aren't as nefarious as taking over the kingdom, but rather to obtain the good fortunes that he envied the rest of Hyrule for. Of course, Tears of the Kingdom has a chance of one-upping Wind Waker in this regard with its story and antagonist, but would honestly take quite a bit of work to dethrone it. Just give me a bit of thematic depth, it's been so long. While neither of these games quite manages to top it, they both easily have the best story of any of the 2D games, and it's not even a debate. They both respect the finale of The Wind Waker by distancing themselves completely from Hyrule, the Triforce, Ganon, and all of that. While Spirit Tracks isn't as good a continuation of the story like Phantom Hourglass is, all three games do still make for a really solid trilogy. One area where both games don't manage to even come close to Wind Waker is with the antagonist. Ganondorf in that game is the best villain in the entire series, so naturally there was no way that they were ever going to top that. But it is a little disappointing that they didn't really manage to make a villain nearly as threatening or interesting as Wind Waker. Phantom Hourglass is just some demon. He's only really interesting in how it affects the Ocean King and his failure to stop him. I find that I prefer Calamity Ganon in this regard. You can see his presence everywhere in the world, from the malice blobs around some of the towers, covering the Colosseum, the Divine Beasts, and especially Hyrule Castle, which is almost always visible no matter where you are, like the moon from Majora's Mask. That's not to say that Bellum isn't effective. The backstory of what you explore in this game is fueled by his role in the world, again, similarly to how Calamity Ganon works. I think that the final encounter where you go for a rematch is about on par with Breath of the Wild. After learning the backstory and previous failure to stop him, it makes for a more impactful final encounter. The Chancellor from Spirit Tracks has more of a character, and though he's evil for the sake of being evil, I'd be lying if I said that he wasn't an entertaining antagonist. Besides, Bayern has actual interesting motivations, wishing to be more powerful than his mentors before eventually realizing his mistake. Which isn't a super strong arc, but he doesn't really get that much of a focus, so I think that it works for what it is. Phantom Hourglass sets up a lot of interesting elements that all have pretty good payoffs. What starts as a simple quest to rescue Tetra from the ghost ship turns into a quest to defeat an ancient evil. It's a good setup, but it's the characters that really make the story work. Ciela has amnesia, which I think is a far more intriguing mystery than Link's amnesia from Breath of the Wild. Partly because the base of the narrative is laid out before Link leaves the Great Plateau, and the rest of the game is mostly just him getting even further context or remembering different characters from the past. I think this approach works for the game. However, here, since Link doesn't already know the backstory of the land, it means that the game can lay out a much better mystery. It also allows for Ciela herself to be a more interesting character since she's on a quest to discover who she once was, ultimately leading to an outcome that's pretty interesting. I also like the twist relating to Oshus. Even though it's pretty heavily foreshadowed, it still manages to work since none of these things are explicitly called out, and there are other explanations for it. At this point, I'm mostly just talking about the best character from this game, Captain Linebeck. He is single-handedly the best character from either of these games. First of all, the interactions that he has with Ciela and just the way that he's written in general is legitimately funny, and it adds so much charm to the game. But the main reason I like his character so much is his arc. I honestly like it more than Groos's, mainly because you spend a lot more time with Linebeck in comparison, so it allows for more time to develop that character. He only joins the gang for the rumored treasure aboard the ghost ship, constantly chastising Link for taking too long and spouting about how he could have done it better. But at the same time, he's also a big coward. Throughout the game, you'll get chased around by his ex-girlfriend, with him hiding while Link handles the situation. He avoids conflict at all costs and constantly runs away from danger. But then we get the most satisfying moment of the entire trilogy, where Link is knocked unconscious and Linebeck finally decides to show some courage and goes to save him from Bellum. At the end of the game, the only thing that he wishes for is his ship back, to continue his adventures. It's such a good payoff for his character and is easily the highlight of the game's story. Spirit Tracks' narrative is comparatively not as interesting. There isn't really a mystery involved, it's a lot more straightforward. Link is an engineer, gets his certificate, helps Zelda escape the castle to investigate something, only for her spirit to be separated from her body, thus leading Link to restore the titular Spirit Tracks and reunite Zelda with her body. While it's the weakest premise of these three games, Zelda herself more than makes up for it. This is hands down my favorite incarnation of Zelda in the entire series. When people say that Breath of the Wild Zelda is the most developed, that's how I know that they haven't played this game. She is your companion here, tied with Midna as the best in the series. She's filled with so much personality and has a really solid arc. She's sheltered and thinks that Link should should be the one doing all the work, not because she's entitled, but because she legitimately believes that she can't be of any help. Throughout the game, she proves to be just as useful as Link in the quest, the payoff being the last moment when she helps Link with a fishing blow against Malladus, thus proving that she is capable. It isn't quite as impactful of a moment as Linebeck's, but it still manages to be a pretty good arc for her that, while similar to what came before, is different enough in how it's executed. Overall, the story and presentation of these games I would say are worthy continuations of the Wind Waker. But next we get to how, at least one of these games, manages to outdo the Wind Waker. The Great Sea in the Wind Waker was kind of trash. It was bloated, and the many islands weren't interesting enough to justify the map size. Sailing took 5 million years, and a lot of the excitement of finding optional stuff was mostly locked behind treasure charts that, while fine on paper, ultimately led to a lot of the rewards feeling kind of meh, and required too much effort to obtain, meaning that the majority of the game essentially railroads me to only finding the main quest enjoyable. Phantom Hourglass fixes this issue in its entirety. It's a much smaller map. In comparison to the 50 islands in the Wind Waker, this game only has 16, and the game feels much more inviting to explore. All 16 islands are memorable and have some sort of value. They're all memorable and distinct, from a variety of minigame islands to uncharted islands that you can stumble across. This game realizes the potential that the Wind Waker had, despite being smaller in scope and in a more limiting perspective. On top of this, much like in the Wind Waker, the islands that are part of the main quest are pretty strong. Some islands feature an interesting challenge, like the Maze Island, which, as the name would suggest, is a maze where you have to find all the gossip stones within a time limit, with there being 3 difficulty levels, and it's a lot of fun. The Uncharted Island has you needing to fill in the shape of the island on the map yourself. Even something like DS Island is fun. It doesn't really have that much to offer outside of a few courage gems and rupees, but even so, it's still a fun inclusion. That's not to mention that once you reach the halfway point of the game, the entire sea opens up, meaning that you can do whatever you want. And unlike Wind Waker, the game is set up in a way that you can always do something on any island that you discover, even if you can't fully explore it. This is where the beauty of the map system comes into play, since it's easier to mark down an area that requires an item you don't have that you can easily come back to later. It's a truly wonderful experience. The last 3 objectives in the game are even able to be tackled in whatever order you see fit, unlike the Wind Waker, which had the Earth Temple and Wind Temple arbitrarily put in a linear order, despite the fact that realistically you could have easily been able to do both of them in whichever order you wanted. The rewards here are also a big step up, no longer limited to just sea charts, though they still exist here. I'm not as annoyed with their existence here as I am with the Wind Waker, since the world is much smaller, so going out of my way to see what they lead to is way more justified. The game also does away with heart pieces by replacing them with heart containers. There's 13 in the game, so you can still get a bunch of hearts, but it's more significant in that actually obtaining them requires a bit more effort. It also makes exploration and completing side quests feel even more enticing. You can also upgrade your sword, learn new moves, and all that jazz. This also has arguably the best trading sequence in the entire series, with there only being 5 steps to it, and there's a bit more variety in where you go, on top of the smaller map size, making getting to those locations far more respectful of your time. And all this before you even get into the ship part system. The most obvious improvement over its predecessor is that the ship you travel with gets a meaningful sense of progression, but it goes beyond that because every playthrough of the game will yield different parts, because whenever you start a game it will randomly assign different values to different parts, from very common to very rare, with the golden set being the only one that stays fixed. This means that every time you play the game you will still get a valuable upgrade without it being the same upgrade that you got last time. Aesthetically, it will look different, and if you put multiple of the same set, then you can upgrade how many hearts you have on the ocean. It was also introduced with the intention of trading ship parts with others via Nintendo DS Wi-Fi. While a novel idea, it is nice that it had a secondary function of adding replayability to the game. This is one of the few times that I can safely say that a lack of RNG would actively make the system worse. With how much the game values exploration, it would absolutely hurt if you always got the same parts every time. I absolutely adore this game's Overworld. It is easily one of the best in the entire series. It blends its non-linear and linear elements seamlessly, and it's probably one of the reasons I'm not the biggest fan of the Wind Waker. While I adore speeder tracks in general, if there's one aspect of the game I'm not that big a fan of, it would absolutely be the Overworld, specifically the train portion. You are literally railroaded in where you can and can't go, and there isn't any freedom afforded to you. Exploration during these sections is absolutely non-existent. You can only pick a location that you want to go to, and it is so unbelievably boring that it makes trekking across Hyrule Field and Ocarina of Time without Epona a far more tantalizing option. There's just not a lot of player interaction outside of occasionally switching tracks or taking care of an enemy. Not helping this is that the fast travel is arbitrarily out of the way and locked behind these gates. I almost never use them because they're so out of the way that I legitimately forget they even exist. Where the issues really stem from is that there just aren't enough distractions from the mind-bogglingly boring downtimes to make the game fun. The only thing outside of enemies that you can interact with are the bunnies. There are 10 of them in each region, and to give credit where it's due, I think that it's fun trying to catch them. But the minigame to actually do that only takes 10 seconds at most due to the time limit, so it's that and then back to agonizing boredom. There really aren't any overworld objectives that even utilize the train in any interesting way. There are times when you have to transport a passenger, and it's kind of fun because you have to follow the game's rules instead of just having it at max speed. Of course, the problem comes from the fact that this is the only thing to do on the tracks outside of the main story progression, so ultimately the game just wants to waste your time. It's not like it's completely terrible, there are exceptions to this, albeit that these exceptions aren't enough to negate the general boredom that exists within the rest of the overworld. The first of these being the phantom trains. They have these patrol routes that you have to plan your route around, and these moments are pretty fun. Unfortunately, they're locked into specific areas. If they were equal in speed to Link and could access the entire map, then I think that would help immensely with traversal since there would now be an interesting distraction. Having to follow the gaze of the big statues in a bigger situation is also pretty neat and a nice evolution of something that you would have gotten accustomed to by this point. There's a cave monster that requires more precise aiming. You're boarded by pirates at one point. Going to find and shoot the crystals to open the way to the Ocean Temple is relatively stimulating, and the entirety of the Dark Realm section is phenomenal, with you getting a major speed boost while having to get the Tears of Light to defeat all the Phantom Trains, followed up by a pretty cool boss fight that I'll get to in the next section. Again, these are isolated incidents that don't fix the major issue, but they do stave it off for a bit. Thankfully, the game's overworld when not in the train is a lot better. I particularly enjoy how much better utilized the map system is when compared to Phantom Hourglass. Outside of the Uncharted Island, there really weren't many uses of the map outside of taking notes, and I can definitely appreciate that about Spirit Tracks. They have you having to trace out a path from these statues, making you explore the area, and then they'll do something different with each area. One of them has you needing to avoid the gaze of a statue, another finding the symbol to a door, a riddle involving them, etc. The one on the rail map is so cool because the solution to the puzzle is to realize that the rail map and the area map are the same, so you need to transfer the information from one to the other. There are a few other good puzzles involving the map, like having to help the Anuki find good partners for each other. There's also the stamp book that Nico gives you, which gives you something to look for in all the different areas, the reward for doing so being cosmetic stuff like the engineer's outfit and the great spin for getting 20 stamps. It's a lot of fun trying to track them down, and it gives every area some fun side challenge. I don't really have much else to say. It's very unfortunate how much the miserable train portion of the overworld overshadows the good stuff. But there is absolutely some quality content to be found here, and Phantom Hourglass has easily one of the most underrated overworlds in the entire series, perfectly capturing the essence of what Wind Waker was going for without falling into the same pitfalls. Phantom Hourglass may have a great overworld experience, but its dungeons leave something to be desired. The overworld may have seen a massive upgrade in comparison to the Wind Waker, but the dungeons are unfortunately about on par with it. Their main progression is fairly basic and never asks anything of the player, and the puzzles are pretty hit or miss. It sucks to see considering how much it vastly improved the other aspect of Wind Waker that really bothered me. One of the reasons as to why I feel this way is because the overworld and dungeon aspects of the game should be distinct from one another. The overworld has exploration to supplement the obvious main story progression, so I never care that it's always obvious where to go next. And when you have games like Link's Awakening, the Oracle games, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword, then yeah, I'm gonna complain when other dungeons don't live up to those standards. One problem is that in both games you get the map of the dungeon the second you enter. I don't get why this is the case, considering that they never actually give a valid reason as to why you would need to know the full layout of the dungeon at any given time. The Dark Room in Tower of Spirits proves as much since you don't have the layout, and part of the challenge is trying to find your way around the room. I started doing my usual shtick to briefly give my thoughts on every individual dungeon, but a lot of my thoughts of the dungeons can be described as, it's too simple, the puzzles are too easy, it's mostly just going through the motions. The Fire Temple is a fine enough first dungeon. The Wind Temple has an interesting idea with these gusts of wind everywhere, but again, it's still really obvious where to go and what to do next. The Temple of Courage is a bit longer and a bit more engaging than the previous two, but it still falls into the same general pitfalls that they fell into. The Ghost Ship is yet again a fairly basic dungeon, just like all the others. The Goron Temple is more of the same, though this one does get the added benefit of being able to control Gongaron and Link. It's got a different flavor when compared to what came before, but not enough of one for me to be fully engaged with it. The Ice Temple is once again fairly basic and takes little to no effort to actually complete. To go into any more depth with any of these dungeons would get even more repetitive than it was already. Normally in a Zelda game I most look forward to the dungeons, but this game is the one exception where I most look forward to being done with the dungeon so that I can get back to the incredible overworld. However, much like how the Wind Temple in Wind Waker was a bright spot in a sea of mediocrity, Muto's Temple is actually kinda decent. For instance, there are several times throughout the dungeon where you have to activate an object that is out of view of the camera, whether it's activating a switch from far away in order to get through the door in time, or opening a door to shoot a switch that's in the next room. It also is the only time in this game where it does literally anything with the idea that the boss key is a heavy physical object that you need to carry by having skeletons assail you. You can just put the key down, but I appreciate the attempt. The puzzles are also slightly more interesting here, though it is the weakest with the central theme of changing the water level, and it isn't even close. With that said though, the Wind Temple from Wind Waker isn't just a step up from other dungeons in the game, it's a massive leap away from them. I actually consider it to be one of my favorite dungeons in the series, but Muto's Temple caps out at just being okay, which is a far cry from Wind Waker's best dungeon. Spirit Tracks falls into the same pitfalls when it comes to the macro design of most of the dungeons that Phantom Hourglass falls into, but it more than makes up for that with its micro-level puzzles that greatly enhance them and make all of them range from decent to surprisingly good. The latter half of the dungeon content in this game is the prime example of what I look for in a dungeon that's linear. If you aren't going to allow me to find out how to progress through the dungeon, then at the very least make the progression path fun to go through, and Spirit Tracks absolutely does this. The Forest Temple is definitely the least interesting in the game. I can forgive it somewhat considering that it's just a warm-up, though it is still a bit too simple for its own good. The Snow Temple is also simple, but it has two interesting ideas that it explores, those being ringing bells and the boomerang, which can transport not only fire like in Phantom Hourglass, but also these ice flames. The two puzzles involving bells are transporting them to the central room of the dungeon, followed up by ringing them all in the correct order. Are any of these puzzles hard? No, but it is fun to execute the solutions. The Ocean Temple is when things start getting good. The mini-boss acts as this interesting puzzle rather than an actual fight, with you having to realize that you need to be pulled in by him to perform a counterattack rather than run away from him trying to escape the whip's grasp. There's this one room with boulders that fall into another square once you hit the switch, which changes where the boulders fall on the floor below you, which is a wonderful puzzle that involves thinking about the layout of the dungeon as a whole, something that I always crave with every Zelda game. There are a total of 6 floors, so it's a bit more lengthy than other dungeons, and it's generally a more fun experience than any other dungeon you'd have faced thus far. The Fire Temple has a puzzle where the solution is to learn a game mechanic, and that's not fun. I got stuck for a while until I remembered that you could pick these arrow orbs up, which was either intended to be like that, in which case that's a really cheap puzzle, or it's an oversight, and I really hope that it was the latter. Otherwise, it's another fairly solid dungeon. The way in which it uses those arrow orbs aren't as complicated as they are later on, but they still do ask you to think about their positioning in the room to fire an arrow at something important. This room with the circular platforms and the lava geysers is fun, with you having to use the orbs to hit both eyes within a time limit is another simple puzzle that I think it overcomplicates just enough to make my primitive ape brain do a slight bit of overclocking. The last room with the boss key is easily the highlight though, with you having to get the boss key in a minecart over to where it needs to be, hitting the switches in time so that it doesn't get dumped into the lava, an actual legitimately good use for making the boss key a physical item you need to carry. The Sand Temple is the obvious highlight. There's actual, meaningful, motivated backtracking, with the return to the room you need to go back to being just as interesting as your first journey down that path. And the Sand Rod allows you to interact with so many different things that were previously inaccessible, which opens up the dungeon considerably. It does unfortunately close back up again after this room though, but the Sand Rod is enough of an interesting puzzle element that I don't really mind. None of these dungeons are amazing or anything, but I will take a set of decent yet fun dungeons to whatever Phantom Hourglass had. Now, if you've played these games before, or know one of the things that Phantom Hourglass is known for, then you'll know that there are 2 dungeons that I haven't brought up yet. That being the Temple of the Ocean King and the Tower of Spirits. The Temple of the Ocean King is commonly considered to be one of the worst dungeons in the entire series, if not the worst. Personally, I think that's not only a massive over-exaggeration, but that these 2 dungeons are actually the best that either game has to offer. Yeah, I kinda lied when I compared Muto's Temple to the Wind Temple. It's more equivalent to the Tower of the Gods or the Earth Temple more than anything. First of all, I really like the idea of a dungeon that you revisit multiple times over the course of the game, and Phantom Hourglass almost manages to live up to that idea. We'll talk about the problems a bit later, but first the good stuff. Each revisit isn't an exact one-to-one repeat of what you already did. The new item that you got from the last dungeon recontextualizes how you approach the old content. It also tests how good your notes were the last time you played through it, allowing you to speedrun your way through it a little bit better with each revisit. The phantoms are difficult to avoid, so you're encouraged to learn their patrol paths and then plan your run accordingly. Where the dungeon ultimately suffers is that while it has a really cool concept, it has these little things that hold it back. The whole thing is under a time limit. The game is called Phantom Hourglass, and this is why. Once you run out of time, you start taking damage whenever you aren't inside one of these safe zones. I'm fine with the time limit in Majora's Mask since everything in that game was bound by it. Here though, it's exclusive to this dungeon, and while it does incentivize you to get through it as quickly as possible, it also adds a layer of stress that I don't really think adds to the experience in any positive way. It also has annoying enemies as well as puzzles that are a bit too basic for their own good. Still though, I think that everything else about the dungeon is phenomenal. It really pushes the map note-taking to the extreme, and I love it. The Tower of Spirits generally fixes the problems that the Temple of the Ocean King had. For one, these are the best puzzles in either game. They can be really devious and are incredibly satisfying to figure out. Phantom Zelda adds a lot of puzzle potential, and they really delivered. There are multiple types of phantoms, each one interacting with the environment in different ways. One can light torches, one can destroy walls, one can teleport to seekers, but not every phantom can perform every action, and the most complicated puzzles involve you having to use every type. Each floor gets progressively trickier until you get to the last floor, which sees you having to weave in and out of different floors in order to get different types of phantoms to different places so that they can interact with stuff to open the way forward. Intentionally getting caught by seekers so that you can move it to a more ideal spot for Zelda to teleport to you, and all this while maintaining this navigational challenge of getting Zelda and Link to either the same location or to two different spots to complete something. It is truly a phenomenal puzzler. And yet, despite loving it, I can't help but feel like its inclusion is kind of wasted. This is because their solution to fixing what people disliked about Phantom Hourglass is to keep the returning to the same location angle there, but instead it's now split up into bite-sized chunks. I do not understand why this is. It feels like they were arbitrarily sticking to the same formula as the previous game, despite the fact that it would have been far better if they had just taken all the ideas and puzzles and just made them the game's dungeons. Like, they couldn't have just stripped the time limit out and had every puzzle remain solved forever, so you're just taking a quick walk down a layout that's already been done so it actually feels like you're returning there. It's kind of annoying having to return to the Tower of Spirits over and over again in a way that I was never annoyed with Phantom Hourglass, partly because of the horrendous train sections, but also because the game's pacing and dungeon content would greatly benefit from just splitting that content up into the different realms and combining them with the already existing dungeons. Otherwise, it's my favorite part of the game without question. None of the bosses in these games are all that challenging. However, all of them make creative use of the DS hardware, which ultimately leads to a set of solidly fun bosses. Blaz has you using the boomerang to combine the three mini-form versions of him, but in the specific order that you see from the top screen. It's an okay boss, but only because he's the first boss in the game. Cyclock has you needing to pay attention to both screens in order to toss a bomb into the correct cyclone to stun him. It's definitely a step up from the previous fight, if only because it makes a bit better use of the two screens. Crake is one of the best fights in the game, with one of the most creative uses of the top screen. He is completely invisible, but the top screen shows you his vision. The second phase drops this idea, which is weird to me. I feel like a natural evolution of the fight would be to start with him being visible, and then he turns invisible for the second portion, especially since it's harder when he's invisible. The Cubist Sisters is where we get the standard Zelda energy tennis match, and they actually do something somewhat interesting after the first phase, with them passing the ball amongst each other before shooting it back at you faster, which is a legitimately cool way of keeping you on your toes throughout the fight. Until there's only one again, in which case it returns to the status quo. It's a fun fight, not much else to say. Don Garango sees you needing to switch between Gongaron and Link in order to tag team the boss, avoiding his attacks while you stun him with Gongaron and then attacking with Link. It's a little cumbersome to fight, but thankfully the second phase has Link facing him alone. But the fight is also a lot less interesting. Just throw a bomb into his mouth as he starts inhaling and then slash at him, rinse and repeat until dead. Gleeok has you using the grappling hook as a way to bounce the fire and ice that each of the heads spew out back at the opposite head. It's essentially another take of the Twin Nova fight from Ocarina of Time, and I think that it manages to be just as fun in Phantom Hourglass as it was there. I particularly like that as the fight progresses, it gets smarter and will try attacking the rope itself, meaning you need to be smarter and faster with how and when you place it. I particularly like how the progression of the fight ends with you using the grappling hook on its tongue at the end. It's a consistently fun fight throughout. Eox has you needing to launch yourself and using the hammer to break off its armor, and it's a fine enough fight, I guess. It's never boring, but the fight does lack interesting progression. You're mostly just doing the same thing over and over again, just getting vaguely harder each time. I do like the spectacle of the fight, however, with him towering over you, taking up 2 whole screens. That's about all I have to say about him. Spirit Tracks' bosses are about the same quality as Phantom Hourglass's, but I find that they are, for the most part, more mechanically interesting than previously and are on the whole more enjoyable to fight. One of them is even an evolution of one from that game. The naming scheme is even similar. Stagnox is easily the weakest boss from either game, just requiring you to use the whirlwind to stun him, the strategy only changing very slightly for the second phase since he's flying and you need to be a little more precise with it. There's not that much to say about him, he's simple and bland. Froz is a better version of Blaz from Phantom Hourglass, with you needing first to attack him with the opposite flame to what he's powering up with, before getting wise and destroying the torches, which then has you needing to use the remains of his previous attack to damage him when he has the opposite element. The only real knock I have against the fight is that attacking these mini versions of him is pretty annoying. Otherwise, a solid boss. Phytops has you needing to launch one of its spikes into its eye. Outside of this, the boss is a bit too simple to be that interesting to talk about. It's especially sad considering that the grappling hook boss from the previous game was actually really good. But alas, much like how a lot of the two games' design ideals contrast with one another, it only makes sense that at least one boss would as well. Kragma is a really solid fight, with you needing to get him to smash a boulder to create a platform to act as a minecart that you need to ride so that you can shoot the weak points all along his body in order to stun him, allowing you to attack him. This fight is somewhat challenging and it remains engaging all throughout. There's not much else to him, it's just a fun boss. Byron is a fun duel, utilizing Phantom Zelda in a much more satisfying way than Gongaron. You need to avoid his attacks before he gets his arm gauntlet stuck in the ground, requiring you to then use Zelda to knock him to the ground so Link can get some hits in. The second phase has you performing some side strikes against him before he dashes towards Link, where you take cover behind Zelda, who holds him back, allowing you to get some hits in. The fight is consistently fun, but I also like how it shows Zelda and Link's arc through gameplay, with you needing to use both of them effectively in order to beat him. It's a cool instance of how games are unique when it comes to storytelling, and the possibilities that are open if you approach story and gameplay in a way that harmonizes them. Anyway, back to the bosses. Skeldrick is kind of an annoying boss, with you needing to launch the boulders he shoots out into the weak points on his body. While trying to get the aim down can be somewhat enjoyable, the boss just isn't that fun overall. The pacing of the fight isn't great, it's really slow, and what you do during that time is really not interesting or fun enough to justify the time spent on it. I do like the last phase though, with you needing to use the sand rod in order to slow him down so you can attack his weak point. If only the rest of the fight were as enjoyable. The Demon Train is the only proper boss fight that you have on the train, and given how solid the fight is, I'm not entirely sure why. It's a really fun fight, with you needing to constantly switch tracks to prevent being rammed, but also not switching so that you're too far away to attack it. The fight is also on a soft time limit, and that's really my only complaint, since you need to be fast enough to prevent running off of the tracks. The first phase has you needing to destroy the explosive barrels in the back, the second phase ups the ante by having you need to destroy 4 lasers, and the third phase has you needing to destroy the lasers again in order to get in front of the train to launch cannonballs into its face. And all this while you avoid the demon train switching rails and the dark fire that occasionally obstructs your path and other such things. It's a great lead into the finale of the game, and it's a darn shame there isn't more like it elsewhere in the game. The final battles in both of these games are fairly good and leave both of them on a good note. Bellum is broken up into 3 phases, the first of which has you needing to avoid the ooze he spews towards you, as you use the grappling hook to pull him toward you to attack him. Then he'll climb to the next level where you need to shoot his tentacles while avoiding his attacks, of course. After you shoot all of them, he'll crash down to the floor below where you repeat the earlier process. The second floor shenanigans repeat before he climbs to the third floor where you once again attack his tentacles. Then he'll crash to the first floor and you'll have to draw an hourglass to stop time. How poetic. Repeat the process a few times. This phase is not particularly great. It's mostly kind of monotonous, and up until the final part, it never really ends up being that interesting. The second phase has you needing to follow the ghost ship and attack it after Bellum possesses it. It's a step up from the previous phase. Tracking the ship and trying to be fast enough to hit all the eyes that surround the ship can be pretty fun, even if it poses no challenge whatsoever. The final phase gets rid of your free access to freezing time, with you needing to engage in a one-on-one duel with him to stun him long enough for Seela to release a Phantom Sphere to freeze time to damage Bellum. As the fight progresses, he gets more aggressive, with a spin attack that's nearly impossible to avoid. This is a really solid final boss, mechanically engaging despite still being simple. Overall, a pretty good way to end the game. Maladus is a big step up from Bellum. Both phases are much better and more fun than what he had to offer. The first phase has you needing to get to Maladus at the other end of the train while avoiding Chancellor Cole's attacks, ranging from rats that scare Zelda to puppet strings that do exactly what you think they do. Once you get to the other end of the train, Possessed Zelda and Real Zelda will move through the air, with you needing a precise shot on Possessed Zelda to end the phase. While Phantom Zelda's involvement with this phase of the fight isn't as solid as her involvement with Byron, it's still fine enough. The second phase has you needing to deflect the fireballs that he sends towards Zelda so that she can charge her power or whatever. While the timing can be a little frustrating without the great spin attack, I think that overall it's a pretty fun first half. The second half of the phase involves you needing to use Link to distract Maladus while Zelda sneaks in behind to hit his weak spot from behind with the light arrows. While this half can be a little repetitive, Maladus does change up his attack just enough for it to remain fun throughout. Are these the best bosses in the series? No, absolutely not. Outside of Gleeok, none of them are really that interesting from a design perspective. All of them are shallow, though they do offer a fun experience. Now let's wrap this thing up. The DS Zelda games are flawed, and I would never deny that. Phantom Hourglass offers dungeons that are shallow and uninteresting, while Spirit Tracks has one of the worst overworld traversal experiences in the entire series. But despite that, I still adore these games. At the end of my Minish Cap video, I posed a question, one that I think I'm able to answer now that I've reflected on the DS games as I've written this script. What others see in Minish Cap is what I see in the DS games. I don't think any video or essay that I would ever be able to make or write would ever truly be able to capture what it is about these two games that captivate me so much. Phantom Hourglass is tied with Oracle of Seasons for me, despite the obvious superiority of the latter. Spirit Tracks is tied with Oracle of Ages and A Link Between Worlds as my favorite 2D Zelda game, despite both of these games being a lot better than this one. Could it be nostalgia, as the first 2D Zelda games that I really got into? Could it be that the two of these games fixed issues that I had with the Wind Waker while carrying over all of its style and charm? Phantom Hourglass fixing the overworld and Spirit Tracks fixing the dungeons? I suppose I'll never really know. But what I do know is that these games will always have my love, even if the rest of the world despises them. And I'm okay with that.